Hello and welcome to Firstpost Spotlight, where we bring you stories that matter to you from all across the world. From breaking news to the day's biggest controversies, we shed light on issues that shape our world. I'm Joshua Barnes, live from the Firstpost studios. Let's begin with the top headlines. Bangladesh seeks Sheikh Hasina's extradition as Dhaka sends a fresh letter to India after the former Prime Minister receives a death sentence, marking the third formal request since she fled to New Delhi last August. The Indian Navy commissions INS Mahi, its first indigenous anti-submarine warfare shallow water craft, marking a major step in strengthening coastal defence. China lashes out at Japan after Tokyo plans deployment of missiles on one of its islands, just 110 kilometers from Taiwan, calling the move dangerous and destabilizing. In Thailand, mass evacuations continue as a southern provincial region faces severe flooding. One fatality is confirmed, and the Prime Minister orders a forward command centre to coordinate rescue efforts. And Belgium faces school closures and major travel disruptions as unions begin a three-day nationwide strike to protest government spending cuts and proposed labour law changes. Let's begin with the latest effort to break the deadlock in the Ukraine-Russia war. The United States and Ukraine are pushing ahead today with a revised peace plan, a plan that both sides agreed need major corrections after the first draft was criticised as too favourable to Moscow. This comes after a full day of talks in Geneva on Sunday, where both teams issued a joint statement calling the discussions highly productive, while acknowledging that several major issues are still unresolved. They have not released any specifics of the revised draft yet.
All right, we had a very good day today. I think we made a tremendous amount of progress, even from the last time I spoke to you, and I apologize for keeping you waiting, but there was more work to be done. You know, we began almost 3 weeks ago with a foundational document that we socialized and ran by both sides, and with input from both sides.
The earlier draft, a 28-point proposal that drew heavy criticism from European nations and Democrats, has now been modified. The original US version required Ukraine to cede territory, accept limits on its military and drop its NATO ambitions, terms widely seen as tilting towards Moscow.
We arrived here today with one goal, and the goal was to take, what is 28 points or 26 points, depending on which version as it continued to evolve, and try to narrow the ones that were open items. And we have achieved that today in a very substantial way. Now, obviously, like any final agreement, they'll have to be agreed upon by the presidents, and there are a couple issues that we need to continue to work on.
European nations say they were not involved in that first draft, but submitted a counter-proposal on Sunday that pushes back against territorial concessions and supports a stronger Ukrainian military.
The task now is to use the 28-point plan presented by the U.S. government as a basis for drafting a document that is acceptable to all parties, which will be presented by Ukraine, accepted, and used in negotiations with Russia.
While respecting and acknowledging the efforts made by the U.S. administration, I believe that this plan, this peace proposal, needs to be thoroughly reviewed, above all, so that Europeans and Ukrainians can feel represented and can build the just and lasting peace that Ukrainians logically deserve and need.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who led the U.S. delegation, says they have narrowed down the unresolved issues and made substantial progress. The White House says the updated text reflects Ukraine's national interests and addresses their core strategic requirements. President Trump earlier set Thursday as a deadline for President Zelensky to approve this plan, though Rubio says that deadline may not be set in stone. On Sunday, Ukraine said that it will continue to defend its national interest and that its overall position remains unchanged.
Tomorrow is also a busy day. We are defending the interests of Ukraine, where the strength of our position, the strength of our state-centric position, of the people's Ukrainian position, is that it is our common position. the unity of Ukrainians in the defense of their national interests and of our independence and our sovereignty.
Although Kyiv has not issued a formal statement on the updated draft, the White House says Ukrainian officials believe the revised document meets their security needs. President Zelensky publicly thanked the United States, saying American support, starting with the Javelin missiles, have saved Ukrainian lives. He also said it matters that the Trump team is hearing us and expressed gratitude to Europe, the G7 and the G20 for sustaining their support. As the focus shifts from war to dialogue and diplomacy, fighting on the ground and in the air continues, with no full pause in hostilities. The mix of US sanctions, European pressure, draft peace proposals and a conflict that has been ongoing since 2022 forms the backdrop to the latest talks. And while Ukraine says civilian areas have been hit, Moscow has repeatedly denied this, maintaining that its operations target only military and energy infrastructure. So, as both sides push towards Thursday, the shape of a possible peace deal is changing quickly, but still faces major hurdles. More rounds of talks are expected throughout the week. And for more on this, we have with us Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics and International Affairs Analyst, who's joining us live from Wicklow in Ireland. Thank you very much for joining us, Scott.
Thank you so much, and thanks to your viewers.
Scott, we've been at this point before. High-stakes discussions have taken place on a potential ceasefire for previous months, if not years. Are these negotiations any different from those previous peace efforts?
Yes and no. Yes, this was perhaps the most serious Kremlin ultimatum. And this was initially a 28-point Russian ultimatum, not a U.S. plan, that was embraced by certain Trump administration officials, notably the real estate developer Steve Witkoff, Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, possibly the Vice President J.D. Vance. So going into last weekend, it appeared to be a demand for Ukraine's surrender, including giving up the rest of the Donetsk region, this strategic area in eastern Ukraine, including Ukraine being banned forever from joining NATO, limits on Ukraine's armed forces to only 600,000 personnel, giving Russia a 4-to-1 advantage, a limit on Western military assistance to Ukraine, and Russia being able to not only have sanctions lifted on it, but to rejoin the G8. But there was pushback from within the Trump administration against this proposal. It went too far in supporting the Kremlin. After all, it was the Kremlin's plan. And that's why Marco Rubio was important. He let it be known through U.S. legislators that this was the Kremlin's idea, that the Kremlin had leaked it. And then on Sunday, Europe and Ukraine put out this counter proposal, this plan, which is very different from the Kremlin's ultimatum, very quickly. First, it begins with a ceasefire, and then you discuss the points to be resolved. The Kremlin plan says you accept all our demands, and then we have a ceasefire. Second, it leaves the door open for Ukraine to join NATO, although it says there is no consensus at this point. Third, it raises the number of Ukrainian military personnel permitted in peacetime to 800,000. Fourth, it provides for meaningful security guarantees for Ukraine rather than the vague declarations in the Kremlin proposal. And fifth, all funds for Ukraine's reconstruction, including those from frozen Russian assets, will go to recovery instead of a portion going to the Trump administration as profits.
Yes, and let's stay with the Trump administration. A lot has been said about their role in these negotiations. Do you think the tactic of flip-flopping between seemingly backing Ukraine and then suddenly backing Russia, do you think that has had a detrimental impact on these peace negotiations?
Oh, it's damaging to say the least, because what you had is that after Donald Trump said last month that you had to freeze the conflict on the front lines, you have this one faction led by the real estate developer Steve Witkoff that went to the Russians, worked with the Russians to say, no, Ukraine must give up territory. In other words, they went around Trump to try to force this ultimatum on Ukraine. And you have J.D. Vance that was scheming behind the scenes. We're now finding out to support that. Then you have not just Marco Rubio, but the U.S. agencies, the State Department, the military, the intelligence services, trying to pull the situation back. So this U.S. infighting gives this idea of being unstable, unpredictable, and chaotic, although in the last 24 hours, what it has done is it's opened up the space for Ukraine and Europe to regain the diplomatic and the political initiative, at least for the moment.
Yes, and Scott, finally, of course, throughout these discussions, both Ukraine and Russia have spoken about their red lines. They've remained consistent throughout peace negotiations. Do you see either side compromising if it does lead to a peace deal?
I think, and I've said this for months, that Ukraine will accept a ceasefire and talks based on the fact that Russia occupies 19% of Ukraine for the near future. That's Crimea, parts of the east and of the south. But Ukraine will not give up those territories in the long term. In other words, it will not give up legal recognition that these are Russian territory. And secondly, it has to be very clear to the Russians that the attacks have to stop on the ground and on the air. That puts the ball into Vladimir Putin's court. We are now almost 4 years into a full-scale invasion in which he wanted to break Ukraine, to split Ukraine, and to put his own puppet government into Kyiv. Will he pull back on that ultimate goal, his legacy, and accept a ceasefire? And I have to say, I think that's where this stops. I think Putin will not stop for the moment those attacks and will not accept that ceasefire, which means Europe is going to back Ukraine. Will the rest of the international community, including the US, continue to back Kyiv's resistance?
Yes, of course, further discussions expected this week, but the situation on the ground remains the same for those living in Russia and Ukraine. Scott Lucas, thank you ever so much for your time and your insight.
And thanks to you and all your viewers.
So, while Ukraine and its allies push for peace, the intelligence game is picking up speed, and this time, the tension is much closer to home for Britain. Just yesterday, the Royal Navy intercepted a Russian warship and its supporting vessel, sailing through the English Channel. British officials say its patrol ship shadowed the Russian corvette named Stoiky and the tanker Lelunya. As the Russian vessel drifted off the French waters, NATO allies took over surveillance. London says this was routine monitoring, but the pattern isn't routine. Officials say Russian naval movements around UK waters have jumped by nearly 30% in the last 2 years. And it's not just ships. The UK has deployed 3 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft to Iceland. They're tracking Russian submarines and surface vessels moving through the North Atlantic towards the Arctic. And this comes on the back of another flashpoint. Last week, a Russian intelligence ship named the Yantar allegedly shone a laser at British military pilots near Scotland. London called the incident provocative and dangerous.
Russian action is deeply dangerous, and this is the second time this year that this ship, the Yantar, has deployed to UK waters. So my message to Russia and to Putin is this: we see you, we know what you're doing, and if the Yantar travels south this week, we are ready.
And British intelligence believes the Yantar isn't just a research ship. They suspect it of mapping undersea fibre optic cables and power lines linking the UK to Europe. These cables carry up to 95% of global internet traffic. Any sabotage could hit banking, communications and supply chains. In response, the UK has announced new sanctions targeting Russian cyber groups after the alleged Yantar spy ship incident.
That Russian action is deeply dangerous, and this is the second time this year that this ship, the Yantar, has deployed to UK waters. So my message to Russia and to Putin is this: we
are going further with new pressure on Russia, and the UK is announcing new sanctions against Russia's cyber criminals, targeting those who seek to undermine our security through ransomware and phishing attacks.
And there's pressure on land too. Last month, Ukraine arrested a British citizen accused of spying for Russia's intelligence agency GRU. Authorities say he photographed military sites, identified troops, and passed coordinates for payment. London is yet to comment on this publicly. So while leaders meet behind closed doors, trying to carve out a peace framework, the reality at sea, in the sky and on the ground tells a different story. Right now, Europe is running 2 strategies in parallel. One is negotiation, while the other is pressure through constant surveillance. Our next story comes from West Asia. Iran has issued a sharp warning, accusing the United States and Israel of attempting to target Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and undermine the Islamic Republic. 86-year-old Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader since 1989, holds the final authority over all state matters. Iran's intelligence ministry claimed that, quote-unquote, the enemy seeks to target the supreme leader through assassination attempts and through direct hostile attacks, adding that anyone involved, knowingly or unknowingly, was acting as an agent of Israel and the United States. Reports suggest that earlier this month, Iran's supreme leader Khamenei had also issued a hardline warning to the United States, saying Tehran would not deal with Washington unless it withdrew support for Israel, pulled US troops out of West Asia, and stopped interfering in regional affairs. Iran did not point to a specific incident, warning that direct threats to Khamenei had been unheard of before the 12-day Iran-Israel war in June. During that conflict earlier this year, Israel had targeted senior Iranian military figures, nuclear scientists, key facilities and residential areas. At least 14 nuclear scientists and several senior Iranian security commanders were killed in those strikes, delivering a major blow to Tehran's nuclear capabilities, with the United States also joining the conflict. And during that conflict, President Donald Trump declared that the United States knew, quote-unquote, exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding, calling Khamenei a very easy target. However, Trump added that the US would not take that step, at least not for now. Some reports also claimed that US President Donald Trump blocked an Israeli proposal to kill Khamenei, fearing it would trigger an uncontrollable escalation. Donald Trump said that he had saved Khamenei from what he called an ugly and ignominious death. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu dismissed those reports, but said such a move would end the conflict. Inside Iran, President Masoud Pezeshkian recently said he feared for the supreme leader's life during the war, and admitted that Iranian institutions could turn against each other if Khamenei were targeted. In July, the supreme leader said Israel's attacks aimed to weaken Iran, spark unrest, and push people into the streets to topple the system. A ceasefire between Iran and Israel has been in place since June the 24th. However, both Israel and the United States have warned that they will strike again if Tehran restarts its nuclear program. This latest warning from Iran's intelligence ministry marks one of its sharpest accusations against its foreign adversaries and signals just how fragile the unsettled truce remains. And moving on to our last story. India and Canada are once again working to stabilise a relationship that has gone through a deep diplomatic freeze. This renewed engagement comes as both sides look for economic and strategic room in a rapidly shifting global landscape. At the G20 summit in Johannesburg, Prime Minister Narendra Modi met Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney for bilateral talks. Both leaders described the discussion as constructive and agreed to restart stalled negotiations for a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, or CEPA. According to India's statement, the two leaders agreed to begin work on a high-ambition CEPA aimed at doubling bilateral trade to $50 billion by 2030. Both sides also reaffirmed long-standing civil nuclear cooperation and noted ongoing discussions on expanding collaboration, including long-term uranium supply agreements. Carney posted on X that the new push could take Canada-India trade to a significant new high, calling India the world's fifth largest economy and a major opportunity for Canadian businesses. He added that Canada considers India a reliable trading partner, even though there may still be some sources of friction.
What we're looking to do is to put that on a sound footing through a potential trade agreement between the two countries, which gives protections to our businesses, protections to Indian businesses, a clear set of rules, dispute mechanisms, and others, and build on those opportunities.
The June meeting between the two prime ministers ended a 2-year diplomatic freeze that began after former Canadian leader Justin Trudeau publicly accused the Indian government of involvement in the killing of Khalistani terrorist Hardeep Singh Najjar, an allegation New Delhi has strongly denied. Despite the diplomatic row, two-way trade did continue, reaching around $30 billion in 2024. However, experts say it remains small compared to the scale of India's economy. Meanwhile, Canada's total trade with China was nearly 4 times higher. After the freeze, Canada's renewed engagement marks a significant economic and diplomatic shift for both New Delhi and Ottawa. Earlier in October, Canada's foreign minister visited India with the same aim, to elevate India-Canada ties.
The main message that Canada is bringing to India is that we are here to elevate the relationship with India. We have a focus on domestic public security in Canada. At the same time, we are working to strengthen the economic relationship with India across various sectors. Those include AI, energy, agriculture and agri-food, climate and environmental sustainability, as well as people-to-people and business-to-business ties.
And Canada's need to diversify its trade beyond the United States is becoming more urgent, with 3/4 of its exports tied to the US market and new tariff pressures emerging under Trump's trade approach. At the same time, Ottawa is navigating complex relationships with China and India, pushing it towards a careful balancing act. India's scale, a population of 1.4 billion people, growing economic weight and critical mineral strength makes it a key long-term partner. With 1.7 million people of Indian origin living in Canada, the relationship carries significant economic and political weight for both sides. So as India and Canada return to the negotiating table, the reset is being driven by economic priorities, strategic pressures, and the need for stability over years of strain. Talks on the trade deal are set to continue, with both sides treating this moment as an important chance to rebuild momentum in a key bilateral partnership. That's all we have on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Until then, thank you for watching.
From breaking news to the day's biggest controversies, shedding light on the world's top headlines, detailed analysis on the stories that matter the most to you. Catch it all on Spotlight at 6 p.m. India time and 12:30 GMT, only on Firstpost.
Hello and welcome to Firstpost Live, where we bring you the day's top 4 stories from across the world. I am Gusheen Garland, live from the Firstpost studios.